Hook, a moment that changed everything. The boardroom was silent. 12 executives sat around the long glass table, staring at the man at the head of it, a billionaire who had built his empire from nothing, and who was about to lose everything. Alexander Reed had only 10 minutes left before the board would vote to remove him as CEO of his own company. The documents were ready, the investors had already decided, and the lawyers were waiting. But what no one in that room knew was that the person who would save the company wasn't a powerful executive. It wasn't a lawyer, and it definitely wasn't one of the investors sitting around that expensive table. It was a quiet maid who had been cleaning the office floors every night for 2 years. And when she finally spoke, the entire room froze, because the truth she revealed would destroy a conspiracy, save a billion-dollar company, and change the lives of everyone in that room forever. Chapter 1: The Billionaire Who Was Losing Everything. Alexander Reed had once been the definition of success. At 42, he was one of the youngest tech billionaires in the country. His company, Reed Dynamics, had revolutionized smart infrastructure and security systems used by cities around the world. But Alexander never cared much about the money. What mattered most to him was his daughter, Emma. Emma was 8 years old, bright, curious, and the center of Alexander's world. 3 years earlier, his wife Olivia had passed away after a sudden illness. The loss shattered him. For months Alexander buried himself in work during the day and grief at night. The only thing that kept him moving forward was Emma's small hand holding his whenever life felt too heavy. He promised himself one thing. No matter how busy he became, he would never let his daughter feel alone. So every morning he made her breakfast. Every night he read her stories before bed. To the outside world he was a powerful billionaire. To Emma, he was just dad. But success often attracts enemies. And inside Reed Dynamics, a quiet storm had already begun. Alexander trusted his executive team completely, especially Victor Lang, the company's chief financial officer. Victor had been with the company almost from the beginning. Calm, professional, loyal, or so Alexander believed. Over the past year, something strange started happening. Major investors began questioning Alexander's leadership. Projects started failing unexpectedly. Financial reports showed sudden unexplained losses. Stock prices slowly began to drop. At first Alexander blamed the market. Then the competition. But the problems kept growing. Soon the board demanded answers. One morning Alexander received the email that changed everything. Emergency board meeting. Agenda. Leadership review. Which meant one thing. They were preparing to remove him. That night Alexander sat alone in his office long after everyone had gone home. The city lights outside reflected across the glass walls like 1,000 distant stars. He rubbed his tired eyes. He couldn't understand what had gone wrong. That's when he heard the quiet sound of a vacuum cleaner in the hallway. The office cleaning staff had arrived. Among them was Maria Alvarez, a 35-year-old maid who had worked in the building for 2 years. Maria was the kind of person most executives never noticed. She moved quietly, she spoke politely, and she always kept her head down. But Maria noticed everything, especially during the late nights when the executives thought no one was around. Over the past months she had overheard many conversations while cleaning the offices. Arguments, secret phone calls, whispers about investors. But one night she heard something that made her stop in the hallway. Victor Lang was inside his office talking. On the phone, his voice was low but sharp. Once the board removes Alexander, Victor said, the company will be ours. The investors already agreed. The losses will force them to vote him out. Maria froze. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Someone was setting Alexander up. For weeks she wondered if she should say something. But who would believe a maid? And what if she was wrong? The night before the board meeting, Maria saw Alexander again. He was sitting in his office, exhausted, staring at a photo of his daughter on his desk. For the first time she realized something. Behind the billionaire reputation was just a father trying to hold his life together. And suddenly Maria knew something else. If she stayed silent, an innocent man would lose everything. Chapter 2: The Maid Who Spoke the Truth. The next morning the boardroom was filled with tension. The investors sat quietly, their faces serious. Lawyers arranged documents on the table. Victor Lang stood confidently beside the projector screen, presenting financial reports showing the company's decline under Alexander's leadership. Every chart pointed to the same conclusion. Losses, bad decisions, poor management. Victor ended his presentation with calm authority. For the survival of Reed Dynamics, he said, the board must appoint new leadership. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. Alexander Reed would be removed. Alexander listened quietly. He knew the numbers were real. But deep inside, something felt wrong. Still, he had no proof. The chairman looked around the room. It's time to vote. At that moment the boardroom door slowly opened. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was Maria. She was still wearing her cleaning uniform. In her hands she held a small folder. The executives looked confused. The chairman frowned. This is a private meeting. Maria's voice trembled, but she didn't leave. I know, she said softly. But you need to hear something before you vote. Victor's face immediately changed. Security, he said sharply. Please remove her. But Alexander raised his hand. Wait. Something in Maria's expression caught his attention. Let her speak. Maria stepped into the room slowly. Her heart was racing. I clean these offices every night, she began. Most people don't notice me. But I hear things. She placed the folder on the table. Inside were printed recordings from her phone. 3 weeks ago, Maria continued, I heard Mr. Lang making phone calls about forcing investors to turn against Mr. Reed. The room went silent. Victor laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. Maria pressed play on the recording. Victor's voice filled the room. Clear. Undeniable. Once the board removes Alexander, the company will be ours. The chairman's face turned pale. The investors looked at each other in shock. Alexander stared at Victor, disbelief flooding his mind. For months his own CFO had been sabotaging the company. Victor stood up suddenly. This proves nothing. But the damage was already done. Within minutes the board suspended Victor and ordered a full investigation. The vote was cancelled, and Alexander Reed remained CEO of his own company. When the meeting ended, Alexander found Maria standing quietly in the hallway. You saved my company, he said. Maria shook her head. I just told the truth. Alexander looked at her for a moment. Why risk your job for me? Maria smiled gently. Because last night I saw you looking at your daughter's photo. And I realized something. What? Good fathers deserve a fair chance. Weeks later the investigation revealed the full conspiracy. Victor and several investors had manipulated company finances to force Alexander out. They were removed and prosecuted. Reed Dynamics slowly recovered. But the biggest change in Alexander's life had nothing to do with business. One evening he invited Maria and her young son to dinner at his home. Emma immediately liked her. Soon Maria began working as Alexander's assistant and advisor, helping him rebuild trust inside the company. Over time something unexpected grew between them. Not power, not money, but respect, friendship, and eventually love. Because sometimes the person who changes your life forever is the one the world barely notices. And the greatest empires are not saved by power or wealth, but by courage, honesty, and the voice of someone brave enough to speak the truth.